In today for Jay Zimbauer. Jay Zimbauer, the professor of automotive technology. So, to begin with, I want to tell you and make it clear that I am not an ASE certified mechanic. I'm sitting in for Jay, and I am a certified lubrication specialist, certified by the STLE, and I'll be taking questions and talking about lubrication, oil, filters, fuel additives, transmission fluid, gear lubes, grease, those kind of things. And wouldn't want to mislead you with trying to answer your questions on mechanical problems. Now, I know we got John on the line, and so we'll chat just a second about speedometers and exhaust my level of knowledge in no time at all. But, John, are you there?
Hi there, yeah, hello.
What's going on with your speedometer? Maybe we can bat it around for a minute and get an idea anyway.
Okay, I've tried to analyze the thing. I have no check engine lights, so the auto parts store said they won't even put the scanner up to it. And I've put new brakes and so forth all the way around, but I've got a tachometer but no speedometer, no odometer, and no cruise. But it says goes into cruise, it lights up and so forth. Now, I replaced the ABS thing on the differential, but I still got no speedometer. The odometer is still reading, it's got 300,000 miles on it, but there's no odometer moving.
Let me ask you this. What model and make of car are we talking about here?
Oh, I forget all that. It's a 2004 Dodge Ram 1500.
Okay. I may be wrong, but I think it still has a speedometer cable, and that comes out of the side of your transmission and comes up through and works its way up into behind the dash for the speedometer. Now, do you have what you'd call an analog indication, a needle that starts, or do you have a digital readout?
Okay, the speedometer is a needle, but the odometer is digital readout.
Yeah, well, that's fine, but all the other stuff you worked on has nothing to do with the speedometer indication. Now, the speedometer, if it's not coming from the standard cable out of the transmission, then it's being done completely electronically, and that means that there's going to be some type of a sending unit that's just failed, that's no longer sending up any signal that the drive shaft or the final output of the transmission is moving. See, the thing is in order to log actual miles and miles per hour, you can't take the engine revolutions because you have to take the output from the transmission. So usually they still use some type of a cable coming up that gives an indication. Now, they could have gone to an electronic sending unit, but it's got to count the revolutions of the final drive, the shaft coming out of the transmission that connects to the drive shaft. That's the only way that it can do it. It can't use another part. So since your tachometer is still working, it indicates that they're not trying to do a computation for speed off of the engine RPM, so they're still taking it off of the transmission. So why don't you take a look at your transmission and see if you see it'll look like a cable a little smaller than your small finger coming up off of the transmission. They used to be located closer to the back, but I can't say that on that model, but I think you probably have a bad speedometer cable coming up from the transmission.
And let me ask this one more detail, just in case I need to know this. The truck is 10 years old, and when I bought it, it said odometer exempt. Now, if I had to get a dashboard, if it's odometer exempt, can an ASE certified technician change the speedometer if I bought a junkyard model? If the truck is if the truck is exempt from, I'm not lying about the mile,
Right,
mileage.
right. I don't know. That's a good question, and I'm sure if you call over to Zimbauer's Automotive, one of the guys there could tell you, but I don't know how easy it is to reset the odometer in that application. I don't think you need a new odometer. I think you just need the cable that comes from the transmission.
Okay, because I wondered, but I don't have to verify the mileage because it's
right. It's beyond it. So all you're doing now, even if you sell it, is signing the thing that the odometer has already turned over, and you're not absolutely sure what the miles are. So there's a place to sign that on the title when you transfer the vehicle if you sell it. So legally, they recognize that it's already gone beyond verification.
Great.
All right. Well, that's it for my mechanical question answer. So, folks, after you heard that, you shouldn't need any more advice on calling me about mechanical problems. Now, what I would like to talk to you about is about lubrication and oil. And I'm gonna climb up on the soapbox for a minute and give you some information and some advice, okay? There's a bad situation that's already happened around the country, and it's something you should take note of. When you pick up a quart of oil out of your favorite store, wherever it is, and you look at the label, you expect that what's on the label is what's in the bottle. That's a natural thing. It says it's a 5w-20 SN rated or classification oil. Well, that's what you bought because your owner's manual said you needed a 530 SN oil, and you go out and put it in your car. So you have some confidence you've done the right thing. Apparently, we're going to have to say you got to be really careful. It started out in Indiana a few months back. A company producing oil, they sort of started up, came out of nowhere, which is not unusual, producing oil, and one of the we would call them down here, for example, it's not the same, they're a different company, but somebody like Circle K, 7-Eleven, one of these stores that just has, a place you can buy a couple quarts of oil if you need it. You can fill up with gas, and, of course, you can get the ever-present soft drink and a pack of cigarettes, whatever it is you want there, right? Nice stores. We're glad we have them. Well, these guys up in Indiana were selling oil just like any one of these stores would, and the Indiana Consumer Protection Agency is really on the spot, I think. Something maybe we should send a delegation up from Florida to check out how you really do this and protect the consumer. They took oil off the shelf in a couple of these stores, and they took oil that said it was 5w-20, 5w-30, 10w-30, 10w-40, and 2050. They took those varieties of oil. They took them to their state laboratory and tested them, and all the oil was the same. There was no difference in any of the oil between the ones labeled 520 all the way up to 2050. And even worse, the additive package was so non-existent, the oil wouldn't even qualify for the 1970s SA rated oil, much less a new modern SN rated quart of oil. So for those people that had gone into this place, bought this oil, and put it in their car, their car was totally unprotected, just absolutely unprotected. And so Indiana, being a pretty aggressive state government, they decided to put an end to this and to make an example. So they fined the oil company a number of millions of dollars, which they knew would be more than they could pay, so they would just declare bankruptcy and be gone. That sounds okay. You hit the guys that are being fraudulent. But they also fined the stores that were selling it. And those guys took for granted that what was on the bottle is what it was too. But what the state of Indiana said was that they had a shared responsibility to ensure that the products that they sold actually were what they were and would not cause harm to their customer. So, a big lesson learned. But the people in this that should have the most to learn out of this is the consumer. And I will give you a couple more states. It's unfortunate, but some more state examples of this when we come back after the break. But I've just got to tell you, you're the one that has to do the due diligence. Now, we're going to take a break, pay some bills, and I'll come back, and we'll go right on into a couple more states about this.
The timing belt's done shrunk one size.
And Watson sitting in for Jay Zimbauer today on Car Time Radio. Before the break, we're talking about some, let's just call it pure out, fraudulent oil being sold up in the state of Indiana. And as I said before, it was a situation where a whole series of weights of oil, 5w-20, 5w-30, 10w-30, 10w-40, and 2050, were actually all the same oil in the bottles, and they were absent of the necessary additives to be classified as a modern engine oil. Now, what that means in your engine is that you can suffer accelerated rapid wear while that oil is in there, and probably the first thing you would know that was really bad is when you just started losing compression because the rings had worn so bad from lack of lubrication that you couldn't hold compression in the engine anymore. And at the same time, you would end up with every other moving part significantly worn due to the lack of anti-wear additives and maybe that the oil was too thin for the application. Now, in Michigan, another state up north in the Midwest, similar problem. They go out and test oil. They found another company. Now, in this case, it wasn't quite as bad. They had one oil that did meet the viscosity rating, but it didn't meet any of the rest. In Indiana, they couldn't actually say that the oil met anything, but it was meeting one. For example, it was a 10W-30 that they were selling as a 5w-20, 5w-30, 1040, and 2050. So that was just the same viscosity. And they had a little bit more additives in it, but they got fined really heavy, but no fine was administered to the selling organizations, just to the faux pas oil company that started up to do that. And just about 2 to 3 weeks ago, it was reported that 2 companies in the state of Missouri were banned from ever selling another quart of oil or any product in the state of Missouri because of absolute fraudulently represented labels on their bottles. So now, you may say, well, that's Missouri, Indiana, and Michigan, but we live in Florida. And if you don't think there's any fraudulent oil that could be sold in Florida just because we're in Florida and those guys are out in Missouri, then I think we should negotiate some kind of a contract on a bridge I have for you that's somewhere in Arizona, okay? Because this is being done in a lot of places. And you'd say, well, why is this all of a sudden showing up? Because, folks, when you go through an extended recession period, and people are scrambling to stay in business, scrambling to make enough money to not be forced out of business, they start cutting corners. And when they cut corners, they make substandard products that they can enhance their profit on those because they don't. You know, the additives you put in this oil, they're things like antioxidants, anti-wear additives. These things are expensive. It costs more money, especially in a petroleum oil. It costs more money to put the additives in than it does to buy the base stock. So if you're going to start cutting back, you cut back on the additives. You go, well, okay, what does that mean? Well, you take the anti-wear additives out of your motor oil, and your engine's shot. It'll kill it, okay? Take the anti-foaming agents out, and it starts to foam. Foaming oil doesn't lubricate. Take the antioxidants out of petroleum oil, and it turns to sludge in a hurry. So those are expensive items that you have to put in the oil. And where you're going to cut back if you need to save money? On the additives, okay? And believe it or not, you also cut back on the base stock. This stuff goes beyond just petroleum oil. There are oils that are coming out that say, hey, this is the greatest 100% synthetic oil you've ever seen. Unfortunately, you don't recognize the name. It might as well be called no-name Willie's oil or something, right? But it is a synthetic stock that is so weak and so poor that the average good petroleum oil would be a better product to buy. It's that weak, but it had the wand waved over it in a certain process to be called synthetic, and they're selling it. And then the old adage comes up in this. If it looks too good to be true, it probably is, because you cannot go somewhere and buy a synthetic engine oil that's worth anything that costs equal or less than petroleum. It just is impossible to produce that. It cannot be done, and if you see it, it means that what's in that bottle is not worth buying. Leave it alone, okay? Now, one of the places in this that is particularly troubling here in Central Florida, okay, is you will find transmission fluid. Transmission fluid, by the way, is the most complex lubricating fluid in your automobile. It has to act as a hydraulic fluid to move around all kinds of plungers and servos and valves and things inside your transmission, which are actually doing the shifting of the gears. It has to allow abrasive clutch faces to actually engage and not slip too much. And it also has to lubricate real bearings and real steel gears. They're called sun and planetary gears. So it's a very complex fluid, and therefore it's the people that make the transmissions call out some really strict specifications for the oil that goes in there because it has to meet those specifications or that transmission is going to have problems. Toyota, they are absolutely draconian. If you're going to use WS fluid, it better be a real WS fluid or else they're going to void your warranty in a hurry. Ford, Mercon, LV, not the same as original Mercon. And there's two different requirements. You may have a vehicle that's older that takes Mercon 3. You may have a new vehicle that takes Mercon LV. They can't be in the same bottle. Mercon LV, the LV stands for low viscosity. It's a lower viscosity. The Mercon, the original Mercon, for example, let's say the original Mercon has to be above 7 and Mercon LV has to be below 6. Not possible to put both those in the same bottle. Impossible. But there are companies right here in Central Florida selling products who they claim are universal transmission fluids. Meets all the specifications from WS to Dextron 6 to Mercon LV to Mercon to Chrysler ATF Plus 4 to Nissan Type 4. I mean, these are all different specs, and some of them will match up and can be in the same, and some can't, okay? So here's the problem. How do you know, okay? Well, what you need to do if you want to have your transmission serviced is you ask the servicing department to show you in writing that the transmission fluid they're going to use meets the specification for your car. I didn't say that it's okay or suitable, but that it actually meets it, because the term these folks use that try to sell this universal ATF is that it is suitable for use in your car. Turns out suitable has no legal specification. So I can tell you that it's suitable that you drive your car 150 miles an hour. Well, I'm not liable for anything because suitable really doesn't mean anything legally. I didn't say it met the spec, okay? So you have to do your due diligence. Just ask them, hey, I want to make sure I'm getting the right transmission fluid in here. I have a Toyota that calls for WS. Can you show me the paperwork that shows that you're going to service my transmission that it's going to meet the WS spec? It's real easy. Any good company, Mobil, Texaco, Chevron, anybody that makes these transmission fluids provides the data sheet that shows the exact specifications that they meet. When it can't be produced, it's because it doesn't exist. Okay, so don't do that. Hold out for the stuff that meets your specification. Now, in the same token, I had a good question during the break about what does it mean when people say, well, we got all this stuff called high mileage oil versus regular oil. Well, what really is the difference? What would I need a high mileage oil for that's different in a car with, let's say, 80,000 miles on it than a car with 10,000 miles? And the real answer to that is, if you want to know the exact real answer, it's that the high mileage oil is finally putting enough additives into it that should have been in there to begin with. So if you want to actually use a better oil, just use the high mileage oil day one. Don't wait till you got 80,000 miles, because what they've done in the high mileage oil is they put enough zinc, phosphorus, anti-wear additives, anti-foaming, antioxidants. They put a robust additive package in the high mileage oil, but that should tell you something about what they put in the original oil. Why do you have to pay for more additives when you go over 80,000 miles? If you'd have used the better additives from day one, you probably wouldn't have any wear to worry about being at 80,000 miles. But if you use an inferior oil to start with, then sure, by the time you get to 80,000 miles, you better put some extra stuff in there because you've already worn the engine significantly using the oil that didn't have enough additives to begin with. So we're asked all the time in the company that I'm with, Amsoil Synthetics, do we have a high mileage oil? And the answer is yeah. All our oils are high mileage because they come with a robust additive package and then to begin with. We don't sell something that's not got just, let's just say, buku additives in it. That's one of the reasons that Amsoil does so well when it comes to long drain intervals and anti-wear status is because we really put a robust additive package in these oils. And it costs more money to do that. So when you find companies that tell you you need to use their high mileage oil, you got to ask yourself a question. Why were they selling me the weak oil to begin with? Why didn't they just make a robust additive package and I could start out day one with that and then I could drive my car 400,000 miles and not wear it out rather than say, oh, I got 80,000 miles on it, the car's got a lot of wear. Now I better start putting the legitimate additives in it to protect the car. It's a great selling point. They're selling lots of oil called high mileage oil because you look at your odometer, you got 100,000 miles, you better buy the high mileage oil. Well, I tell you, tip here from Dan Watson, the certified lubrication specialist. Buy the high mileage oil day one because it's got a good additive package in it, and it will protect your engine, whereas the other oils, for whatever reason, why they didn't put a higher additive package in it, it's probably just for money. That's all you can say is that it costs money to do it. So, yeah, high mileage oils probably worth the extra money, but that's because they've got a good additive package in them that you should have had in any oil to begin with. Again, I tell you, additives usually cost more than the base stock to make the oil. So if you're going to cut corners anywhere, you're going to cut them with the additives, okay? Now, when you go to the synthetic oils, again, you have to make the same evaluation. Years ago, I read an article where one of the big oil companies, their vice president for synthetics, he said, look, the reason we don't recommend any longer drain intervals for our synthetic is because we put the exact same additive package in our synthetic that we do in our petroleum oil. So you still have to be careful, even when you go into the synthetics, to know what you're looking for. We're going to be taking a break, and when we come back, I will talk some about the difference between synthetics and petroleum, and then I'll give you a little bit of insights onto some of the different oils. So we'll be back right after these messages. Oil, you know, that stuff that they're always advertising on TV and you got to buy and you got to put in the car or get somebody to change it. Yep, it's got to be done. Doesn't matter how great the technology goes or whether you got a Bluetooth in the car or not. You still end up having to get the oil changed somewhere. So it's important. And, you know, when it comes down to it, there's not a lot of things these days that you can actually, as an owner, fully control. But you can control the oil and lubricants that go into your car, and you can also control the tires you put on the car, right? So you can control those things. But it gets a little hard after that because these things are so technical. And they're wonderful machines. However, I would say that I've got a van right now I'm having trouble with the so-called brain in it. And when you start having trouble with the brain, let me tell you, these things, pardon the pun, but these vehicle can get a little bit insane, okay? Does whatever it wants. So I'm about ready. I already tried one donor. We found a donor. We got a new brain. We put it in. This brain failed. So I think I'm going to have to go to the manufacturer finally and spend the big bucks and buy another brain and put it in because, man, the car just doesn't work when the computer stops working. It's that simple. So we've been talking about you doing the due diligence to know something about these oils that go in your car and make sure that you ask for the right stuff. It's very important because the longevity, the life of your vehicle, is directly related to the quality of lubricants that you put in the car. Okay, it's just that simple. Now, with the seemingly the surge of fraudulent oils in the marketplace not being what they claim to be, you got to be a little bit more careful and you got to ask for stuff. Now, I can tell you, if you go in and buy name brand oil such as Valvoline or Castrol, you're going to get what you pay for. Those guys have been around. They got reputations to protect. They're going to make products that are going to be everything that they're supposed to be. Those guys have a lot invested in their name and their brand and what they've been doing for years, and they're not going to cut the corners. But when you buy something that you don't recognize it, that it's a name, you use that internet for what it's for. Do some due diligence. Go look that stuff up and see if you can find any real information on it. And be very careful. Best advice, stick with the stuff you know. Now, the question comes up all the time for me, should I use synthetic or should I use petroleum, and why or why not, okay? In almost every case, you would use synthetic versus petroleum. The one time that I would tell you not to use synthetic is when the car leaks so bad that you're pouring, more expensive synthetic out onto the driveway every night as the car sits overnight. That's not a advisable thing to do. Put some less expensive petroleum in it and determine how you're going to stop it from leaking. Don't pour, more expensive oil that it goes through out on the ground. Now, the other situation might be that you feel like that you've got to change the oil every 1,000 miles for some particular reason, whatever it is, then maybe you'd be just stick with the less expensive oil because you're just going to be going through it so fast, and within the 1,000 miles on it, it probably doesn't have time to do too much damage for not being high quality. So those are a couple situations, but in almost every lubrication situation that you can envision, synthetic oils will outperform petroleum. And let's talk about a little bit of why that may be. Well, if you can envision on the floor, a flat piece of floor that you can look at right out in front of you, that we could get down to the molecular level for this oil. Down there, we're in the tininess. We're walking around. We went through the miniature machine, and we're walking around looking at the molecules in this oil. Well, if I looked at petroleum oil, I'd be looking at some type of fruit salad. In other words, I'd have molecules that were as big as, sometimes as big as small watermelons, cantaloupes, and I'd have others the size of grapes. I'd have all these different size hydrocarbon molecules that are in nature that come out of the ground. Now, I would go through a cleaning process to get all the trash out and to get some of the wax out and the different kind of things I want to get out, but when I got down to what was left, I would have this dissimilar group of hydrocarbons, and they would be on the floor. Now, let's say that I took a big piece of plywood and I laid it on top of all these dissimilar sized pieces of fruit laying on the floor. And then I got up on the table and I jumped off onto the plywood. Now, think about that for a minute. What's going to happen? Well, the largest pieces of fruit are going to burst under the pressure of me jumping, putting my 200 and something pounds coming down off the table on top. I'm going to break the cantaloupes, break some of the bigger pieces, and finally it's going to work its way down to where there's enough shattered that there's enough things supporting the plywood, and finally it stops breaking the pieces of fruit. All right, that's petroleum oil. Now I move over to what we call a chemical-based synthetic oil that is like Mobil or AMSOIL. And I look at the floor, and I have a layer of 100 compression golf balls across the floor. I lay the plywood on top of the golf balls, and I jump off the table. Every single golf ball receives a bit of the pressure because they're uniform in size. And what will probably happen is the plywood will shoot off the top of them, and I'll bust my butt. Probably what will happen. But every single golf ball supports some of the weight. That the whole idea in a synthetic product is uniform molecular structure, meaning that I have a perfect lubricating system I've set up here. They're all the same size. They all share part of the load. You say, well, why can't I do that with standard petroleum? Because nature didn't make it that way. It's got multiple compounds. Now, they're better than they used to be. What they can do now at good refineries is they can take all of the watermelons and all of the cantaloupes out and end up with nothing bigger than, let's say, a grapefruit, but I still got grapes and I still got tangerines and everything else. So they can do what they call a finer cut of molecular structure, but they just can't make it uniform. So to begin with, when I look at this, being able to have that uniform molecular structure, I am really onto something. I have created a situation where it's called film strength. Film strength is the ability of that liquid to separate two heavily loaded pieces of metal, to keep them apart. Well, just imagine that layers of golf balls, they do a whole lot better job keeping that metal apart than pieces of stringy fruit, okay? So nature did the best it could, but we actually design the base stock from the ground up. The chemists make the base stock. Now, there's more than one type of synthetic base stock. And let's get to that real quick. The one I just described is what we use in the AMSOIL Signature Series oils and some other AMSOIL products, and that's a chemical-based engineered base stock. There's another one that's now called synthetic, which we argued about it, but they call it synthetic, so we have to go with that. And that is a product which is a super highly refined petroleum, which gets rid of almost all those irregularities. And then they do some real cool stuff with it, the chemist. and that's now called a synthetic. And that's what everybody in the industry except for Mobil and Amsoil are using as synthetics. They're using that product. Is it a synthetic? Yep, because they call it one. Is it as good as the original chemical-based synthetics? No. And where you'll see that apparent is if you come over to the Amsoil families of oil. Amsoil has three groups. They have what they call OE, which is original equipment oil, and what that means is that it is a synthetic that meets the requirements of original manufacturers, and it's recommended to be changed at the manufacturer's recommendation. Then they have a mid-group of oil, which is called XL for extended life, and that synthetic is designed for 10,000 miles or 6 months. But then they have the one what I think is the absolute best oil in the industry. It's called the Signature Series oil. That is a chemical-based all the way right down to those beautiful layers of golf balls with the best, most robust additive package that money can buy. And that oil is recommended for up to 25,000 miles or 1 year, whichever comes first. So when you're looking and you wonder, why does Amsoil have those three families of oil? Well, see, Amsoil is as upfront and truthful company as they actually know how to be. And what they're saying to you is there are basically three levels of oil that you can buy. And they're not going to put one oil in a bottle and claim that it meets some level that it doesn't. So they think there's a market for all three of those areas, a normal drain synthetic, one with up to 10,000 miles, and then for those people like me who want the absolute premium best oil you can buy is the Signature Series oil. It carries the signature of the old man that started the company. It's got Al Amatuzio on the bottle, and he's a crusty old character, and his viewpoint is, if my name is on it, it better be the best oil in the business, and he's just that ornery to make it. So when you go out looking for oil, buy something that you recognize, or you can do your due diligence on the internet. All these companies, if you go, they all have websites. Go on, look at their websites, look at their technical bulletin sheets. If they don't have tech sheets available to look at, then just cross them off your list, because they're easy to make, and all the good companies put them out there. And you can compare their technical attributes and what they recommend for their drain intervals and all those things, okay? And it's not hard. I mean, you guys listening out there, it's really easy internet browsing. You can go look at them, get an idea, and it allows you to have some certification in your own mind that you've managed to get a good oil. I tell you that I think Amsoil's the best. There are other good oils out there. You just make sure that you spend a little time and look, and don't just buy the cheapest thing. For goodness sakes, that will not work. Price makes a difference in this world of lubricants, let me tell you. When you get something that's priced too good to be true, it's too good to be true. And in the end, it will cost you a lot of money. Because I don't know if you've looked at basic engine repairs or transmission repairs today, but it's outrageous. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, sometimes a transmission will be $2,500 to get a transmission replaced. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that, unless you still got a lot of room on your credit card, it's budget busting if it comes up. So you got to protect yourself from that kind of stuff. All right, so we're headed up on another break, and when we come back, we'll take your questions if you have any. I'm right here. Just call and ask me a question.
From under my hood, and he shook his head and said, "This ain't good. The timing belt's done shrunk one size."
And welcome back to Car Time Radio. Dan Watson sitting in for Jay Zimbauer today, taking your questions about oil, lubricants, filters, transmission fluid, fuel additives, whatever you'd like to talk about, except I'm not an ASE certified mechanic. We just heard Rhonda talking about that. And save those questions for Jay. He should be back in a week or so, and I'm sure he'll answer them. I've never known an automotive question Jay couldn't answer, so I'm sure that he'll be able to answer whatever you might want to call it and ask him. Now, we're talking about oil and all its different attributes and so forth, and you as an owner. You know, I want to give you a heads up and tell you, if you haven't noticed, I think the diesel revolution is returning. People that are as old as me Remember back in the 80s when GM tried to ruin the diesel market for America by some of the stuff they produced. That I had one, a diesel Oldsmobile, so I have a right to say that, okay? But the diesels are coming, and you need to know when you buy a diesel. There's these wonderful little turbocharged diesels like the Volkswagen TDI. There's going to be a new Ram van and pickup that has a 5-cylinder diesel that's being imported from South Africa. There are diesels coming in Toyota trucks, Nissan Titan trucks. I'm talking about smaller diesels. We've had the Power Stroke, the Cummins, and the Duramax diesels in the bigger 3,500 and 2,500 pickups, but we're talking about smaller diesel engines that will get 25 to 30 miles per gallon in a 1,500 pickup or a smaller SUV. They're coming. They're on their way. There's nothing stopping them. And you got to be careful when you own one of these diesels to make sure that you get the right lubricants and the right products for it. Remember, diesels have always required some special consideration with their fuel filters. You're going to have excellent fuel filters. Let me give you an example of a couple things. I have a Duramax Chevy diesel, and if I had an injector problem, I'm going to pay about $800 for an injector. I said an injector, and there are 8 of them in the engine. So if I do something stupid with my fuel filter and don't do the right things and I get some bad stuff through and I wear out or ruin 8 fuel injectors, it's $6,400 for the parts. Okay, so as these diesels come into the marketplace, what you have to understand is you cannot be lackadaisical about your maintenance. Maintenance schedules are to be kept up with on diesels. Now, they will pay you back. It is not unusual. I know people with Volkswagen TDIs with 500,000 miles on the engine, and it is running strong. These diesels have to be made of stronger alloys of steel because they run at higher compressions. You run at higher compression and you have higher torque at lower RPM. That results in higher fuel economy. You can be going down the road in a diesel at 1,200 RPM and be developing 90% of the rated torque in the engine. So that converts over to you in fuel economy. It's a tremendous thing. And the more of these diesels that come in, the better we're going to be with fuel economy. So I look forward to that. But I just want the buying public to know that when you buy a diesel, you want to really pay attention to the owner's manual required maintenance, and you want to do it on time. You want to make sure it's done right, and they'll last forever. But you can't abuse these new diesels because they have very, very high pressure injectors. We're talking about 25 to 30,000 pounds inside the tips of the injectors. That's a massive, massive amount of pressure. You let a little water through, and at that 25,000 pounds of pressure in the tip, it will cut that injector like a bandsaw right in the tip, and then it's ruined. So lots of things to consider. Now we're going to go to the line and talk to Dave from Kissimmee. Dave, what can I do for you?
How you doing today?
I am good. How are you?
Just fine. Hey, thanks for subbing for Jay. We all appreciate it.
Well, it's great to be here.
Hey, I've used Amazon for almost my whole life here, but I got a question for you on viscosity ratings.
Okay.
So I've got a new pre-owned car for myself, and it's a Ford. It has a variable cam timing system on it.
Yep.
And it looks like it uses the oil pressure, almost like a hydraulic system to adjust the cam timing.
Yeah, I would say this in this term. I am unfortunately too familiar with this. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So then the question is, this almost seems like one of those cases that you really have to follow the manufacturer's, recommendations for viscosity.
You are right on target, Dave. I won't cut you short, but I will tell you, you're right on the money. I have told so many people in the past year that in all this variable timing, camshafts, all this wonderful stuff that they've got going on, these resting cylinders in some of the cars and so forth, it's critical to use the weight of oil the manufacturer. In this case, the one you're talking about, it's 5w-20.
Yeah, exactly. Typically, I used a 030 AMSOIL, but I wasn't comfortable in using that, so I actually got the 520 AMSOIL.
No, and listen, it's a good point you make, and to follow on to that, if you're going to use a 20-weight oil, now you and I, you said you've used AMSOIL. I would say you can't beat the quality of our Signature Series 5w-20 or even the 0w-20, and that application would be okay. But you really want to make sure you're using somebody's decent synthetic when you go down to a 20-weight oil.
Yeah.
You just cannot use any petroleum 5w-20s. As soon as they get slightly hot, they lose their viscosity. They don't provide the adequate protection. So I want our listeners to know to buy, when it comes to 20-weight oil, you get a synthetic that you can trust. Somebody's name better be on there, like Valvoline or Mobil or Castrol or even Pennzoil, somebody's name that you recognize, and it says synthetic engine oil if you're going to use a 20-weight oil. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, that's a horror story that you talked about up in Indiana. That could be tragic.
Yeah, it is. And the thing is, I'm going to try to find some way to encourage the state of Florida to get just as mean, because I think I could put them on to busting some people here in Central Florida for selling what I consider to be fraudulent transmission fluid. And I'd like for the state of Florida to get that same aggressiveness to protect the consumer.
Yep. Can you think of a reason why you should ever not use a 0W 20? I mean, why would a 520 be any better?
It wouldn't really be in this climate. You couldn't tell the difference, okay? That second number is measured at 210 degrees, so both the 0W and the 5W20 are both the same, have to have the same viscosity to be called a 20-weight oil. The 0W, the 5W, is their cold weather performance rating. I always think of the W as winter rating. And you wouldn't be able to see the difference in a 0W or a 5W unless you were in, if you were in Duluth, where AMSOIL's from, in January you could tell the difference. I can tell you that. That's some rugged people live in Duluth, Minnesota.
Yeah, I've got no plans for that.
No, but in Florida you can't tell the difference between a 0W and a 5W. The real number to pay attention to is the second number. That's the operational viscosity number. First number tells you how easily the oil will pump under cold conditions, and a 5W and a 0W above 0 degrees, you'll never be able to tell the difference.
Yep, that's what I thought too. All right, hey, thanks a lot for taking my call.
Well, thank you for calling. It broke up my long soliloquy. I can say that here. Just talking to myself in the booth. Okay, so thank you for the call, Dave.
All right, have a good day.
All right, a good call by Dave, and let me reemphasize what he's talking about. Listen, Honda is producing cars in Japan, and we'll have them here shortly that take 0W16 oil, okay? I know all this oil for all the old-timers. It sounds like some kind of, you can't do this, thick is better, but it's not. The timing in the variable valve timing that we were talking about, the 20-weight oil is necessary to get the response time you need to change the timing on the valves. If you go to thicker weight oils, it's sluggish, so you will not get the change in the valve timing that you're depending upon. They have these things, believe it or not, called phasers, and I always thought a phaser, you're going to shoot a Klingon with a phaser or something. I had no idea, but they have these things called phasers, and they respond to in a hydraulic sense, to pressure, and they move the actual valve timing. So you need to use a 20-weight oil. So if you're going to use a 20-weight oil, for God's sakes, get one that has the anti-wear, the film strength, and the toughness to handle the situation. And we're running out of time, but there is an actual test that's paramount in these cars. It's called the high-temperature, high-shear rating of the oil. It's tested at 1,800 RPMs and 300 degrees. Now, is there any viscosity left of the oil at that temperature is what they're trying to say. And if it's not synthetic and you're using a 20-weight oil, the answer is no, it's gone. There's nothing left. But if you use a good synthetic, you will have viscosity left at 1,800 RPM and 300 degrees, the high temperature, high shear. So you can find that on the Internet, by the way. And also, listen, if you want to find out more about oil, go to my website. It's called thelubepage.com. Easy, right? Thelubepage.com. And I've written articles in there that I've written, they were written for magazines, but I posted them there. You can read them. I got all kinds of stuff about oil that you can read there. And I have almost 80 videos on YouTube talking about oil. So you can find out all kinds of things at thelubepage.com. And one shout out here for the guys that we're bringing oil on, because I'm setting up the Ace Hardware stores all over Central Florida. And people ask me all the time, where can I find oil in a store? You check your Ace Hardware. If they don't have it, they'll get it from me. And the truth is I'm setting those guys up primarily with Signature Series oil, because if you're going to take the time to go in there and buy it, you should buy the best Amsoil has to offer, and that's Signature Series. Hey, folks, it's been a lot of fun, and I'm sure I'll be back. Jay likes to go hunting and fishing, so I'll be back soon, I'm sure. So until then, keep rolling.